Thank you, Allison. Let me click the continue that yes, it's fine to be recorded. Thank you, Allison. I'm Gail Kennedy. I work here at ACES Connection. I'm a community facilitator and I'm based in California. I'm that Davis, California person. I support communities in California throughout the capital region and parts of Eastern California. Parts of the Western US, and I also, another role that I play at ACES Connection is I do operations. I'm the operations officer with ACES Connection. So today what we're gonna do is talk about workplace resilience. And I'm honored that we at ACES Connection have had I'm just so grateful that we have had a relationship with Karen Johnson, who is joining us today. Previously, when she was at the National Council for Behavioral Health and really led their trauma-informed work at the National Council. And so ACES Connection, we had been working with Karen for quite some time to be sure that as a workplace, we were being sure that to the extent we're able to be a trauma-informed workplace. And we did that work over the last couple of years. And Karen and I talked maybe a couple of months ago and talked about how workplaces are because of COVID, looking at COVID and what has happened with COVID and how workplaces either needed to close down or pull back significantly, or were kept open because that workforce was essential workers, and what the stress and the impact to workers was. And so Karen said, we talked about doing a better normal, about how can we help support workplace resilience, in particularly around this time with returning to work and creating that trauma-informed and resilient workforce in the age of COVID. And then also recognizing the situation that where we're at in our country around looking at racial injustices and systemic racism in our country. So Karen Karen brought in her colleague, Pam Black, who has an education background. So Karen has a social work background and Pam has an education background, and they are partnering to work on creating tools and systems to help support systems change and creating resilient workplaces. And so that's what we're going to talk today about. And then just really quickly before I pass it over to them, Lara Kane, who some of you possibly may know from the work that she's been doing with these Better Normals. She has been leading Better Normals on Thursdays now for 10 weeks, I think, 12 weeks, looking at education and how can we create a better education system. And her webinars her Better Normals are Education Upended, and she'll tell you more about those when we, in the discussion. But right now, what we're gonna do is have Pam and Karen talk about the tools that they have and what they have developed, and then we'll open it up and Lara and I will lead a discussion about it. So Karen and Pam.
Thanks so much, Gail. It's wonderful for us to be here today. As Pam pulls up the slides, I'm just gonna note that Pam and I have both been working in the areas of trauma-informed practices for many years. Pam, as Gail noted, is an educator. She's worked in all levels of the education system, and she is the co-author of Wisconsin Trauma-Sensitive Schools Learning Modules and a consultant for the National Council on Behavioral Health. And I am a social worker, as Gail noted, originally from Wisconsin, so sending out greetings to anybody who might be coming from the Midwest today. In Wisconsin and Milwaukee, I worked for 19 years at St. A, so focused on behavioral health, community services, and child welfare. And most recently was Senior Director of Trauma-Informed Services at the National Council for Behavioral Health. I worked there for 5.5 years, and it was during that time that I was privileged to partner with and learn from and have lots of conversations with the amazing team at ACEs Connection. So we're currently both independent consultants partnering with organizations, systems, and communities that are striving to become trauma-informed. And we really do thank Gail, Laura, and Allison so much for having us today. So Gail, framed up for us a little bit about what's been going on in this environment, but, the goal to support staff in the face of complex challenges has been longstanding. It's not new. In fact, it's a core of becoming trauma-informed to ensure that we take these principles and use them in how we serve the people that we're serving in our organizations, but also to inform how we partner with each other. So we infuse trauma-informed principles in our workplace to make sure that we're trying to create a healthy, engaged, and satisfied workforce that can achieve the mission of the organization. So it's not new, but then COVID-19 happened. And the focus on supporting the workforce became a staggering challenge, which really could not be dismissed or overlooked. And we also had the tragic murder of George Floyd and our country's reckoning with the scourge of systemic racism. And I want to note here that as it relates to the civil unrest of the past weeks, the toxic stress related to racial inequalities and injustice is not new for our colleagues of color. So since March, the workforce needs have been overwhelming, and leaders have been stretched to learn how to meet these needs while striving to adjust to all the things that they needed to change to stay relevant and viable. The really good news is our various fields of practice responded immediately with resources for staff to try to support staff who were working tirelessly to serve clients, students, and families who were at risk in the face of the pandemic, to serve staff who were, for the first time, moving their services online to provide them virtually, to support staff who were working from home while also homeschooling their children, and to support teams and staff who were struggling to have difficult conversations about race and white privilege. Those are just a few of the challenges that leaders and others have tried to address in these past weeks. It's been a tsunami of resources, which has been remarkable. But during this time, as I've talked with organizations and leaders, I've also heard this overwhelming challenge of leaders saying, I don't know what to do with all the resources. I don't know how to organize them. I don't know how to conceptualize how to use them. So Pam and I wanted to see if we could conceive a way to think about and organize the level of staff needs and the responses to the needs. So we brought learning from our different areas of expertise to create what we're calling the Workforce Resilience Framework. So it's a layered structure for organizing resources to support the entire workforce while responding to smaller groups of staff and specific individuals who need more targeted support. So we're privileged to share this with you today. And before I get into the meat of the framework, I just want to share some underlying assumptions that are the foundation for this framework. One is we assume that everyone is doing the best they can. This is a core trauma-informed tenet, and it's critical to effectively using this framework to support staff. We also assume that an organization partners with staff in the quest to realize their mission. So we don't do things to staff or for staff, we partner with staff. We also assume that staff need support skills and knowledge to build resilience in the face of distress, and trauma. So if a staff member is struggling, it could very well be that he or she does not have the needed support, has not acquired the skills, hasn't yet have the knowledge, or can't access the skills and the knowledge due to brain chemistry and being oversensitized and being in lower brain and not being able to focus, concentrate, etc. And then finally, we assume that staff are impacted in individual ways by stress, distress, and trauma and require supports matched to their level of need. So, equity is a core principle of this framework. It's also a core principle of trauma-informed approaches and response to intervention. RTI, for those of you that are in schools, are very familiar with that. It's an educational model. It informed our work, and Pam's going to talk briefly about it, but equity is a core principle of RTI. And as it relates to equity, one of the things we're relearning in the wake of recent events that have highlighted white privilege and systemic racism is we have to intentionally put equity at the center of all our work. So an organization that is implementing this framework honors historical, cultural, and gender issues of all staff, includes voices of everyone, ensures staff have equal access to support and resources, meets individuals at their level of need, and assesses all the framework processes through the lens of equity. The real work of ensuring equity is not just talking about it in lists like this, but in learning to have tough conversations, to grow our self-awareness, to create workforce cultures in which we can address power imbalances, and to hold ourselves and our coworkers accountable to certain behaviors that represent our organizational values, hopefully assuming equity is one of them. So we do think that the framework can speak to all of these above actions and as a result support staff and increase the possibility of all staff having the opportunity to achieve their greatest potential. So here's the framework in its entirety, the whole picture. And it includes our passion and our belief for trauma-informed approaches, our experience with levels of care or levels of need as noted in RTI, and our knowledge of systemic change. So let's break it down for you. And it's important to note that Pam and I are currently working on building out this framework with resources and additional guidance, but today we just want to share the basic model and try to make it come alive by applying it to the example of returning to work in a physical space. So I'm going to pass it over to Pam.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. So for those of you who are familiar with RTI, you can see right away we're starting with an RTI levels of concern and levels of intervention. And when we look at the first one here, it's for everyone. It's at the universal level. And at this level, we're talking about all staff in an organization, and that they would receive similar levels of support or would have access to it at least, similar interventions and trainings on self-care and personal resilience. And that would include prevention, because as we know in the work of trauma-informed, in any organization, we are trying to prevent issues from occurring. We are trying to get in the front end of everything. Now, there's been a lot of research in the area of RTI with schools and with students in supporting their level of academic and behavioral need. And that research has led to a framework which says that approximately 80% of the whole group within an organization would benefit from what we can provide at a universal level. Sometimes that's where our work stops, especially with compassion resilience. And we may actually jump to the individual level and try to support someone individually. But RTI leads us to think about in-between level, where we are supporting people in small groups and providing extra time for them to be with their peers and to learn again in a different way and to engage in those difficult conversations Karen was talking about, to access and then apply the principles that they're being taught and the interventions that are being taught. One of the issues I'll go into a little bit more in a minute is how does someone move from an universal to a group level? And we believe that happens when it becomes apparent in conversations and screenings and in struggles that people are having meeting the demands of their work, that they need that increased support and that they have increased concerns about their physical or emotional safety. And we'll talk more about that. Finally, there is about 5% of an organization based on RTI research that really still have such intense needs and concerns that we have to focus at an individual level and give them additional support, probably on a one-on-one. In most cases, that kind of individual support requires a plan that the individual has helped us create, giving them voice and choice so that they feel empowered and trusted to be a part of this process. Again, a trauma and principle in this. Now, there's times I've run into in schools, and I know this is true in organizations, where the percentages of 100 or 80, 20, and 5 are skewed because of additional stress. And it's probably true for many people now that the concerns are that great with COVID-19 and the stress that's bringing returning to face-to-face or even working remotely, with the racial unease, which has increased concerns for people who are white, but it's also been a concern for many, many, many years, decades, centuries for our colleagues of color. And now we are all beginning to discuss this more. And just yesterday, we learned that the president was going to sign a executive order suspending new work visas, and that was going to impact up to 525,000 possible foreign workers in our country, coming into our country or who possibly are already here, increasing thus again the level of concern on immigration status. So we have high levels of need. And what I tell people at that point is maybe you have to move down and provide group levels, small groups for your entire organization, and you cannot rely on just large group training, that you have to move your interventions down. But that certainly depends on the place. So we add to that, how do we move? What does it look like when we move from level to level? Well, the difference is in the duration of the interventions we are using and the supports, the intensity of them, and the frequency. And that is what changes. And as you can see, the triangles are in a sense backwards as they get larger as they go to the middle towards individual, because we're increasing the amount of time we're spending with people and the amount of services we're providing. So let's look at this just a little bit more in depth before we move on. So let's look at what frequency means. We could start with, for example, a staff meeting in an organization one time per month. And maybe out of that staff meeting, 30 minutes is taken for training or support or check-ins. That's all built into that. And that's your monthly universal support. But there are times when we need to move to maybe one time per week or twice a month. And then finally up to multiple times per day for individuals as we go on that continuum, moving towards the increased level of support. When it comes to duration, we're talking about the length of those intensive interventions or those more universal interventions. We're talking about maybe starting with that 30-minute a month meeting, which most organizations would have, and now on Zoom. But maybe that needs to increase because people need more support for that. Or maybe small groups are going to meet for longer in addition to the 30-minute meeting. And possibly we're talking about, in some cases, training and sometimes support, increasing even to larger portions of a day. Finally, we look at the area of intensity. And this is where we increase the number of people in a group working with an individual, a trainer or a therapist or a supervisor or a peer mentor. We can go from that larger, less intense whole group up to that individual one. So now we want to take a moment to look at how could this be applied? And we're thinking about returning face-to-face. And we're going to, for a second, lean on my experience in the area of education, but this is applicable to all organizations. So when Karen and I began this work, we knew that the best way to increase workforce resilience was to put time and effort into systemic change. And thus we have created the entire model that when followed will lead to systemic change. But we also know that there are moments of stress and intense need where we have to be able to go and easily pull up an intervention and use that immediately. And so we are also advocating for the fact that many of the things in this model can be used in an easily consumable manner. Whichever way an organization decides to go, all three levels of intervention and the support are based on the individual need of the person. So we're going to take a break from here and go to two documents that will be available to you after we finished. First, we're going to go to a survey that I've created through my educational organization, and we'll be talking about with other educators as the month goes on here. In this particular survey, we're really talking about back to school. What does it mean to return to school, and how do you feel about that? It's inevitable that school will start in some fashion, and educators, like parents and students who also have additional surveys, will have some concerns about that. But first, it's important to understand what their where they come from and what their demographics are and where some of their concerns may come from, thus the individual information at the beginning. Then we go to what your concerns are returning to the building. And you can see here that in the first box, we have the question, what is your understanding of trauma, its impact, and how you, your colleagues, or your students might be affected by the return to school? People are asked to choose not concerned, concerned, or very concerned about that. Leading the organization then to determine what kind of training they might need to do in that area before people return. There's a whole host of other concerns, and districts and states are coming out with all kinds of guidelines to try to help people with this. But I have seen and talked with many educators over the last month where these that are in this survey have bubbled up as specific areas of need. So first, in the area of in-person learning, we're asking staff if they're concerned about meeting the whole host of needs that students bring, especially after not being in a physical building and with a teacher to guide them as directly as in the classroom. Their own personal health and the student's health. In fact, the rest of the questions toggle back and forth between the student and the adult in that situation. You will have access to this with the recording. It will be sent out to you in a PDF form. We're looking at putting it also into a Google survey, and so that you can access that as well and use that if that's something you would like to do. Then we move down into the area of level of concern with providing instruction virtually. And what we've learned there is teachers felt very unprepared for that. And so the question is, are you worried about accessing resources? Do you have adequate time to prepare? And can you align your schedule with those of your students' schedules, especially if half of them are home and half of them are in the school building? Finally, are you able to, or are you concerned about connecting with all your students? One statistic that we have learned is that 21% of the students in the country did not connect with a teacher during the COVID time of spring. Finally, we're looking at what possible resources people would need, and it's mostly about time, and I won't go into that. You can read it more thoroughly on your own. But the answers from these are then used to inform the staff as they determine what needs to happen for their staff to make them more comfortable, to make coming back to school a reasonable thing to do. And here is an example of how you can see the easily consumable versus the overall systemic change, and how either of these can be pulled out of this model. In either case, the voice of the people in the organization is important, and we really advocate people seeking that out, even if they don't have time to spend very much time to spend before they have to move forward. Adapting the CDC or the state guidelines is the first step on either side. You'll see when we're looking at overall systemic change, we're talking about a team doing that, a team of people who represent all voices in the organization and all demographics in the organization to create health and safety guidelines based on those CDC directions. That is going to take a lot more time, but will have a better result than on the easily consumable side. And then the assessment is given to the staff, and those two make your resources to determine how you're going to move forward. So in some ways, we will give you and we will provide and guide you through resources, but some of it has to come, the data has to come from within your organization. Then we talk about leadership and human resources meeting to determine interventions and supports at the 3 levels so that we're able to move people back and forth as they're needed. And we can see that using that resource that I talked about a moment ago as a guide. For the group level, support groups created for staff with over 50% moderate or significant concerns. We're going to adapt immediately and not only give them the instruction that they get at the universal level, but provide them with a way to discuss and to work through their issues. Individually, there are some people who need direct and more support immediately. Possibly there are people at risk. Possibly there are people with people at risk in their family, and their concern is high, and so they need some individual plans. This helps you figure out how that is and working out, and hopefully uses your time and focuses in an appropriate way. Again, overall systemic change comes best when we're able to include a team to respond throughout this, and they're able to take into consideration written information from staff. Sometimes we know that's not possible, but that's where we really want to be. So that's our example, and that will also be available and can be crafted out further as we work through this project. So I'm going to now return to Karen, and
Thanks, Pam. Yeah.
she's going to take us through the next part.
Thank you, Pam. So moving on from the frequency, duration, and intensity, just want to talk about this outer circle. These you're very familiar with are the trauma-informed principles, defining principles that we use whenever we're striving to become trauma-informed. In our trauma-informed work, they're the touchstones that we always come back to. Whenever someone asks me, is this policy, is this interaction, was this new program trauma-informed, we'll always take a look at how they honor the principles. So these apply to every interaction that we have with both those we serve and those we serve next to, so our staff, and they are infused into every policy, practice, and procedure. So when we're working to build resilience in the workforce, we keep these front and center. And then continuing to move on, I wanted to talk about, this slide adds the mechanisms for implementing the levels of support as represented by the 4 lines with arrows going across the 3 levels. So we have positive culture as one of them. So it's through positive culture that we create an environment in which all staff needs can be honored. It's within that positive culture that we create the ability for us to have difficult conversations, for us to get better at practicing empathy, for us to be able to hold each other accountable, etc. So that's one mechanism for moving between these, or implementing these different levels of support, for realizing them, I guess. We have leadership, and we know that leadership is at the core of making any of this happen, certainly. And a trauma-informed leader that understands the need to connect with staff, to have relationship-focused workplace, to lean into vulnerability, etc. All of those things. And this arrow is also meant to represent that leadership also needs support in this. So this model would build out support and guidance for how leadership can think about the resources, think about applying them at the different levels of support, and also how they get support. Do they need group support and connecting with colleagues, maybe likely inside the organization, maybe outside the organization, or at an individual level? Do they have a coach or a mentor, etc.? We have a training, which training happens at all levels around everything. And so that's certainly a mechanism for implementing this model. And then equitable practices. We include this here again to ensure that it is honored. So then we move to the last piece of this framework, and that's these 3 arrows on the outside of the circle, which represent the focus of the interventions of support. So connection, regulation, and cognition, really. So let me just talk briefly about that. So these are the 3 areas of focus, of buckets of interventions. Interventions are going to fall into one of these buckets. I mean, there will be overlapping ways that they relate to the 3 different areas, but in general, we can put interventions into one of these 3 buckets. So as it relates to connection, at the universal level, when we're striving to connect, we're talking about empathy with staff, we're practicing that, we're doing team connecting activities at the beginning of every meeting, encouraging connecting through things like staff lunches, in creating opportunities for staff to share about their lives, connect on a level that is separate perhaps and outside of the work itself. At the group level related to connection, we may have small group circles or staff support groups in which people can focus on getting to know each other and connecting, building the relationship. And at the individual level, an individual who is struggling in one way or another may benefit from an individual mentor who checks in with them on a very frequent basis. As it relates to the other second arrow, regulation, at the universal level, we teach about regulation, we teach about brain science and how we need to use many different interventions to stay out of our lower brain, to stay in our frontal cortex to the extent that's possible. And so we teach about that, but we may also practice mindfulness activities at the beginning of every meeting. Every single meeting starts with a mindful activity. Or it's common practice that all staff take a mindful minute 5 times a day. That's modeled by leadership and everyone does it. At the group level, in small groups, we may introduce the practice of journaling. And at the individual level, we may still do journaling, but do that with specific prompts and questions. And then as it relates to the cognitive level or the cognitive bucket, we know that there's tons of stuff that we all have to learn about all the time. And so we go at the universal level, we do lots of staff training through lunches, webinars, learning platforms, et cetera, and we train on all sorts of topics. Let's say one of those topics may be growth mindset. So at the universal level, we're sharing the basic information about that. When we go to the group level related to that, we may have small group discussion related to specific situations, applying the growth mindset. And at the individual level, personalized instruction on application of the components of the growth mindset. So now I want to pass it back to Pam for one other example of implementing some of these practices.
Thanks, Karen. We just want to provide you with this tool. And this will be at the connected, again, the resources, as well as is in the final page with resources. This is from the Compassion Resilience Toolkit out of Rogers InHealth in Wisconsin, and it provides a strategy for how to have those difficult conversations that might be part of how we determine that people need individual needs, or might be part of how everyone talks about racial concerns within their organization, or might be part of how we discuss coming back to the workplace. There are 6 steps, and I'm not going to go through each one of them because I will provide you a written detail of that in a moment. But I just want to point out that step 2 is really important. This is where we stop and we note our own biases, our own racial biases, our own cultural biases, our own biases based on our work ethic, how we were raised, and what we think is a problem or a difficulty and what we do not think is such. And we stop and then we set those aside. And I used to say to teachers, put that in your coat and hang it up and now move forward with your conversation, thinking about the individual or the group you're with through their eyes. And the rest of the model is about working with them to build empathy with them, and then to help them choose the path that's best for them. This is where we really bring in those trauma-informed principles of choice and voice and empowerment.
Thanks, Pam. And just, I want to just reflect on the compassionate steps for action is we would, perhaps the different levels, we train on that, and then you could have a small group around it in which folks can practice in small groups and have more conversation. And of course, they can be brought to the individual level as well to have more intense conversations. So one last slide. Pam and I in our various conversations about this understand that there are limitations and considerations that we just want to share here at the end. So want to note that the workforce resilience framework is not meant to be connected to any personal disciplinary process or performance improvement plan. While an outcome of the process may increase employee performance, it really needs to be separate and distinct from any disciplinary process, and always needs to be used in a compassionate manner, again, built on the belief that individuals doing the best they can. The framework is not meant to replace organizational policies around egregious behavior that might lead to termination. The framework's implementation will require buy-in from staff based on a foundation of trust in leadership. And this really goes to that's a systemic change piece, to create an environment in which we all know we have needs that need different levels of support, and it's okay to talk about those, it's okay to acknowledge them, no one is labeled because of them, and we all work together to create an environment which everyone can be supported no matter what their need. And the last one is just the staff needs change and shift. So it's fluid. An individual might benefit from group level support for one area of need, but doesn't have an identified need that requires group level support for any other areas of their work. And it's very important that we're not labeling any individuals by the level of need. That if doing that would be in conflict with the basic framework assumptions. So one last slide, we have some resources here on this last slide where
it's not changing.
Okay,
so
it'll change when we get to it. I think the first two are related to the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, and we'll share it as part of the follow-up. That's fine. And the two after that are from the National Council for Behavioral Health. They also have an assessment of staff needs that they put out that you may be interested in that isn't specific to schools, like the one that Pam shared. So that's what we've got for today. We so appreciate you listening. We really, I'm going to turn it to Laura now, I think, but just appreciate you listening, welcome any input or feedback, and also just welcome a conversation overall about workforce resilience.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Pam. Gail, anything?
No, go ahead, Laura, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, just echoing that same question that kind of Karen left you with. How does this resonate for you? Does this bring up any questions for your own organizations about how this might work, what it looks like, how it gets implemented? Yeah, go ahead, Gail.
I do have a couple. First of all, thank you both so much. This was a lot of information, and I've got many questions and ideas and comments. One thing, these are sort of simple questions. So, and I just want to be sure that we're answering Alexandra's questions. So the PowerPoints, we will be able to share the PowerPoints. Is that,
Absolutely.
Are you okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So we'll share the PowerPoints and then including the surveys that, that Pam shared. So those will come out. But a couple of things that I was thinking is that, looking at those surveys, that are you creating different surveys or are there different surveys for different types of organizations? Two, I was thinking in particular, two different sectors in addition to the schools would be healthcare settings, because we know that healthcare settings right now are staff are significantly impacted by COVID. So that's one, and they're going virtual, and those same people that are virtual at home have kids at home, and so how to support staff around in healthcare happening. And then the second one I was thinking that's really a sector that needs a lot of support, I think, are family serving organizations. So the safety net organizations that, in addition to everything I just said, also are seeing such an increase in need from their populations that they serve. So anyway, I'll stop there and see if you have any answers for that question.
Well, I think you're right. I think all of our various sectors can embrace the same idea of figuring out what is going on with staff, what's their level of concern, and we can do that through a survey. The National Council for Behavioral Health is a more generalized survey that can definitely serve the need that you're speaking of. But I welcome to hear, Pam too, but welcome to hear if there's anyone on the phone who is familiar with other surveys that have been developed that are relevant to your setting, your sector. And can we share them, or can we find them? Anybody? Have you guys started to receive surveys from your employers, from your system leaders? Maybe not yet.
Well, then we're certainly would help people with that process if they wanted to do that, because having worked on them, having collaborated with others to do that, we certainly can help people with that. But like I said before, there is a piece to each kind of organization that's unique. And so having someone come in with us to help us deliver that would be helpful for them.
But was your question about whether we were going to develop? I mean, I think we are always looking for new surveys, and we have the survey Pam and her colleagues have created. We have the National Council survey. If anyone else has surveys to share, and again, are open to whatever else might be needed. But yeah, there's a big need, voice and choice, big need for. I mean, we're not going to be able to figure out how to respond using this model or any other model if we don't know what the concerns are. So that's a big, huge piece of workforce resilience. And then bringing that voice and the responses to that, whatever comes from that, into the solution process, right?
Right. So that is one of the pieces of response to intervention, and thus of our model, is the idea that we're going to use data, and we're not just going to use the CDC guidelines. That's data about what's important for safety, but now we need data about people's concerns, and we need the two of them together to determine what needs to happen in organizations.
There are a couple of, I'm not sure, Laura or Allison, are you guys monitoring chats? And
yeah, Allison will have to unmute them.
Okay.
So let's call on Mal Rubio. I've just clicked unmute. I think you have to accept unmute on your side. There we go. Go for it.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Hi, Pamela.
Hi.
Thank you for having me. So I have been working extensively with Pamela to gain guidance on how to support staff and students. And so in doing so, we worked with Panorama Ed to deliver surveys to staff and community to find out what their needs have been, and then how to create reports, and then how to then use those reports to create supports for staff. And a lot of staff, are just feeling, having a lot of anxiety about return to work. I have a lot of staff reaching out to me because in the state of California, we have not received clear guidance on how to return safely. So right now, we are not planning to return in August, physically, so to speak, but what that will look like. However, our classified staff have returned as of July 1. But a lot of anxiety surrounding what the return will look like. But because the board has not made a decision, and because the state has not been clear about what that might look like, there's all the unknowns, and you guys know as well as I do, the unknown creates a lot of anxiety. But we're trying to get as much feedback as possible to address, what the new pedagogy is going to look like, especially in response to this social justice movement. what distance learning is, because so many people are not comfortable with it, what kind of professional development training they're going to get. And then from my counselors and other direct services to students, how do we continue to stay in touch with students, especially the most vulnerable, and how do I safely find those students? So that's what we have been putting a lot of effort into, and trying to find guidance in those endeavors or those efforts.
Thanks, Melissa. Just as an aside, Melissa's school district was where I was the day the NBA closed and had to get home from California. So we've been in the thick of it together here.
But you bring up so many challenges, certainly related to the unknown, and again, when people don't know what's happening, there is a lack of trust. It increases everyone's stress, and then difficult to have to problem solve and move forward. One of the pieces related to trust for staff, for leaders, of course, is to try in promoting resilience in organizations, to try to communicate as effectively and as frequently as possible, understanding that people can handle bad news often. People just would love to hear what the current situation is and how it will impact them, so that they can sort out what to do. That's a big piece of honoring the workforce and creating resilience. It's hard though. Leaders are struggling to sort out what the answers are. There's so few answers.
Yeah, I appreciate Crystal's comment kind of along those lines, that, that we've been in systems before where surveys are taken and data is collected and then never acted on. And so then staff feel frustrated, which is, if you think about the 6 pillars of trauma-informed care, right, that trust and transparency piece is huge. And that's exactly what that speaks to, is if you're going to collect the data and ask the questions, even if they don't know exactly what they're going to do with it at the moment, the transparency piece is being clear about that. Like, okay, we have all this and we're still trying to figure it out, and we'd love input, or, just being very transparent about where they are in the process, instead of just collecting the information and then having it sit. Because then people are like, why am I going to participate in that? Or you asked me my question or my voice and then, ignored it. So that really can complicate things in the future if you don't follow through.
Absolutely.
And just along with that, the particular challenges that we have right now, because COVID is so fluid, and we in California are we moving backwards? We thought we were opening up, and maybe we aren't. Maybe we're moving back to being more in a shelter-in-place situation. So that also has an impact on the leadership, because the leaders don't know. And just for example, like the PPP program, which is funding for nonprofits, they keep changing the rules on it. And so leaders, but I think what I'm hearing everybody say is, even if the leadership doesn't have an answer, to be very transparent about little is known.
Yeah, absolutely. What you do know and what you do not know, what you can do, and so that they believe you will tell them as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Allison, did you want to have anybody else?
Yeah, let's hear. We got a lot of comments. Laura, did you see any that you particularly wanted to hear from? We could call on Tasha.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let me unmute you. Go for it.
All right, Tasha in Sunnydale.
No, Tasha. We can hear from Marissa. So let me find you. Marissa. It seems like
Tasha says she's still muted. She wants to speak maybe, but is still muted.
Well, yeah, all I can really do is just click the unmute button, and then I think you have to accept it on your end, but
Okay.
All right, go ahead and try again with Tasha.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, we got it that time.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Well, we are definitely in the trenches with you, trying to get as many answers as we can. We did surveys. We utilized Panorama and have for the last 2 years. And we did utilize that platform for our parent community as well as our students. But for our staff, we chose to do something different because we needed some pretty confidential information. So we actually sent our staff survey out via our Google's process for surveys. We utilized that so we could really ask the questions we needed to ask. And because of the confidential nature, that's why we didn't use Panorama, because we wanted just going to 1 or 2 people here, and then we will disperse the information as appropriate. In addition, I had mentioned in our comments, Santa Clara County kind of compiled, the Office of Education compiled several different types of surveys and put all of those in a folder. So if any of you are connected there, there's all different types, of course, because every district is a little bit unique and different. And so there's a multitude of different types of questions that could be asked. I'm glad to share any of those questions with anyone of what we asked our team. Glad to share that as well. But the responses have been pretty enlightening and helpful. We have not, how can I put this? I haven't seen anything I'm shocked about, but I've seen some things I'm happy to see. I'll put it that way. Like the responses and the things we're seeing and hearing from our students and our parents is not anything that I didn't think I would not see. But some of the things have been really positive and respectful and upbeat, and some of them also asking how they can help those who may not have the capacity to help themselves. So that's kind of what I have to share. And our district is very much trying to have as many equitable processes and practices that we can, and anything we can learn and grow and do better, that's definitely what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Tasha. That's I love how comprehensive you've been around your surveys, but it also reflects the responses. I think reflect a community that is embracing the need to, to support each other, and then are you using the information to guide your practices in different ways, to guide your responses? I'm guessing you are. Do you have, I'm sure you are, but any specific thoughts on that?
It looks like she's remuted. Oh, there you go.
All right,
Oh,
there
there
we
she
are.
is.
Okay, very good.
Sorry, the muting thing might be hard. Thank you.
Yes, I also wanted to share, one of our principals is also on this call, and she's shared, I guess, a download to one of our Panorama surveys. I'm not sure which one.
Yes, saw
Download
that.
in there. But with regards to your question, can you ask, because it was,
how have the responses informed you, or have the survey answers, the stuff you've learned from your community informed your responses to this time? And maybe it's still informing your responses, so you may not have concrete thoughts on that, but just curious.
It's still informing
process. Yeah.
We actually will be presenting to our board this Thursday. In addition to the surveys, we also have established an advisory committee that is informing us well, which is made up of district community and community members. And so we're going to take all of that and then present that to our board. Our board will give us additional questions and concerns that they may have. We will go back to the table, and we are waiting, in addition, for the July 1st, 2nd, supposed to be somewhere in there, we get more of what we consider closer to final input from the state. And that will allow us to take that information with our teams and hopefully try to develop something that's more of a win-win than not. We definitely realize just from the responses that we've gotten so far that we're going to have some, probably some unique pods out there of trying to how we're going to serve families and kids, because we just suspect at this time we're probably going to have a group of kids who are not going to be wanting to return, or their parents are not going to want to be returning them at this time. So we're trying to go into this with that understanding that that's a possibility.
Thank you. Thank you.
I knew this would happen. It is 1 o'clock, so we are at time. It went like that, which they often do. I think, Lara, do you want to say a couple words about, because I think this ongoing, especially in the education world, will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Gail mentioned in the beginning, every Thursday, pretty much, we do one of these Better Normal conversations around issues in education and reimagining a better future for our schools, with different focus areas using the trauma-informed pillars as a lens. This week, I have a guest coming to talk about raising up youth voice in education and how can we empower youth and lift up youth voice as we reimagine our schools. That is this Thursday. And then on July 9th, Pam is going to join me to talk about these surveys and how do we support staff and families in thinking about readiness to come back through surveys and gathering data, and what else might we need, what are we missing, kind of similar to the conversation that we're having here, figuring out what other people are doing and how we might help districts prepare for August or September as they return. So please join us.
We also have a Better Normal happening Friday about grief and COVID. And so you can sign up for Lara's A Better Normal on Thursday and the one that's on Friday and the ones that we have next week by going to our website, acesconnection.com, and then it's on the right-hand side. So you just scroll down a little bit and you register for Lara's. If you're already registered for one, you're registered for all of them. So don't worry about that one. If you've, although I'm trying to think, do you get the notification again? Because that could get buried in your inbox. We should talk about that, Lara. That just suddenly occurred to me. And we hope to see you back. I mean, I'll turn it back over to you, Gail, so we can get some closing remarks. But I just want to invite you all to come back to this A Better Normal series. And also next Tuesday, I am co-moderating A Better Normal with my another community facilitator here at ACES Connection, Danielle. And that's going to be much more of a discussion format where we're really going to open it up to discussion rather than offering a presentation first. And we are going to be discussing redefining American identity. So I hope that you will join us for that. Anyway, Gail, I'll let you get, we would love some concluding remarks from Karen and Pam. Great.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to just open it up, Karen and Pam, and with a specific, what else, how can we help move this forward? I think I'm looking at the chat and it's like people are saying, yes, they want to use it. They want to look through it some, but I think you guys would like feedback from it as well. So if you, and anything else you want to say for closing remarks.
Yes, Pam and I are in, this, because this has happened since COVID, this is new, and we are in the process of continuing to build it out and create guidance and resources that fit into the different areas. And we will be happy to share as that develops. And I think we can get people's contact information maybe from the folks that are on the call today. I'm not sure when we're ready to send more out, etc., if that's possible. We welcome your input. So I think you have our contact information on the slides. Please share it. Please send us any feedback as how this has landed in your thoughts, what questions came up for you, what fit, etc. And that would be, but I want to finish just by saying thank you to ACES Connection. These Better Normal conversations are so helpful, have been, in the overall staff and platform has been such an amazing space for us during these times and of course before as well. So thank you so much.
And I would just add that if any of you want to reach out to us individually because you would like some specific help with your organization, we certainly can do that. And as we craft, we can have you in mind too. So, so it's been great to be here. Thank you so much, Gail, Ellison, and Laura for having us here. And we hope that the information and the tool will in the future be helpful to everyone in these challenging times.
So I just want to thank both of our presenters, Karen and Pam. Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us. And I do want to say one last thing for ACES Connection. We have a community that is becoming trauma informed and beyond. And that might be a really nice place to continue this dialogue. And yeah, so Karen, I'm thinking you guys can share that, and we can engage with that community.
That'd be excellent. Thank you, Gail.
Perfect.
Great idea.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
Wonderful.
I just dropped the link for that group in there.
cool.
So if you all
Perfect.
want to join that one, go for it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great whatever day it is.
Some of you Thursday.
Whatever.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.